Good afternoon, everybody. I know we have a couple of folks who are maybe still getting some food out there and chit-chatting, but hopefully everybody will wander on in here quickly. Hello. Welcome to this the first year of the year's installments of our Life Science Lunch Program. My name is Kristen Jones. I'm President and CEO of the Indiana Health Industry Forum. And in conjunction with our dear partners here at Barnes & Thornburg, we are happy to be here today and be able to have so many of you for this great program and presentation we're going to be bringing to you. I have a little bit of news I need to share right off the bat. We went through several legislators. Turns out this is a busy time of year for them, and while we were very much hoping to be able to have someone in leadership here to give sort of a session overview for you, unfortunately, they're all a little tied up. So we're going to try and cover that here between us. I don't think there's going to be any problem with covering what's going on this year between the knowledge base we have here. So we'll get that discussion started here in just a minute. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, the Indiana Health Industry Forum, we're the trade association for the life science industry here in the state. We cover a really broad base, and we do so for the policy area as well. So we are very excited to have today's discussion that's going to focus on the bio-pharma industry, medical device industry. We're also concerned with some of the legislation that's out there in the digital health space and things that apply to supply chain and suppliers and all the folks that we work with across our membership on a day-to-day basis. Just a couple of other housekeeping notes. I'm trying to remember all the things I had on my to-do list up here. Wanted to say welcome to our new members. We have several of them in the house today. One that did not make it on the slide, I want to say welcome to Monon Bio Ventures, and they bring with them some startup companies, Arithmotech, which is one you may have heard of, and Scioto Biosciences, which is another interesting company that we have kicking off in our ecosystem here. We also have Troy Gobbett with Charodon. Did I get that even close to right? Yay, okay. Who's new to the membership, and we have the towns of Brownsburg and Hendricks County in the mix as well. So if you're interested in finding out more about who we represent, who's in the forum and who's not, please visit our website at ihif.org, and we'd love to have you if you're not part of it. So come and join the club. It's where all the cool kids hang out. I get that on good authority. So. With that, I think the housekeeping is out of the way. Again, a big thanks to the folks at Barnes & Thornburg, particularly Deb Hallberg and Courtney Brown, who are integral in helping put this on a monthly basis. So big thanks to them if we can do that real quick like. It's the spirit. We mean well. With that, we will get started with our panelists here today. We're excited to kick off. The policy piece of this in particular is always a great way to kick off the year because sessions going on, there's a lot in play. It's a good way for people to kind of hallmark and benchmark what the things are that may be coming up in the coming year that they want to pay attention to. We have with us today, I'm going to start with Anne Hathaway, who is here in her brand new capacity, relatively, not quite brand new.
Pretty brand new.
But pretty brand new.
111 days.
Capacity as the Executive Director of the Indiana Medical Device Manufacturers Council, IMDMC. Between IHIF, IMDMC, great uses of acronyms, but, you know, helps you keep everybody straight when you got the play card. Anne is no stranger to public affairs. She has a very long and strong background in state and federal policy. She knows everybody under the sun, it appears, and has been a longtime student of what's happening, particularly here in the state and Indiana legislature. Also joining us is another very experienced member of the public policy arena here. Old man carrying cane. Parts of him, if they all stick together, hopefully they will. Mike O'Connor with Eli Lilly, who is the Senior Director of Government Affairs for them, State Government Affairs. Lots of area there that maybe isn't your responsibility that you're probably pretty happy about. Mike is well known around town here, having worked extensively with as Deputy Mayor under Mayor Bart Peterson. Has been with Lilly for ever and ever at this point, 8 years. Time flies. and is also involved in a lot of civic organizations. So you may know him also from his new role as president of the Indianapolis Public School Board.
Lucky me.
He just picks all the best roles out there, doesn't he? So we are very excited to have him, have Mike and Ann here with us today. And let's just jump into it. Session's going on. Things are happening out there, sort of. Why don't you start? Give us your impressions of what's going on and what kind of.
Let's sum it up. It's a short session.
What's happening?
And SB1 is the Sunday sales bill. And today goes for third reading in the House. And oh, by the way, the question is will we wait till July 1, which happens to be a Sunday, or will we basically become effective immediately, which all of a sudden affects supply chain and everything else with regard to getting alcohol to stores. So that's what this session, frankly, it has been about.
Well, I'd like to point out that in order to implement it immediately, they would have to declare an emergency. And as an avid beer drinker, the fact that I can't buy beer on Sundays is an emergency.
And oh, by the way, have we noticed that since we've decided to serve beer on Sundays, or have liquor stores available, no one's talking about how cold it is.
Right, right.
But anyway, there are other things going on at the legislature as well, but it is a short session. The other conversation last night was, do they adjourn on March 14th, or they try to get done by March 9th? There are a number of workforce bills that I think Mike and I both want to talk about later that have been discussed. A lot of things as relates to workforce will probably be deferred till the long session next year because of the budget implications. But we've begun the discussions this year. There will be a lot of things kicked to summer study committee where we'll have the opportunity to discuss them further. But let's face it, this is an election year, and everybody's focused on what's going to happen in May, and then what's going to happen in November, and what the legislature is going to look like next year when it is the long session and a budget year.
Yeah, and that's sort of how I would frame it. I think while there's a flurry of activity, and some things I think are going to get done, thank God we can buy beer on Sundays, this is kind of a prelude to I think, much more substantial change. We saw Senator Long announce that he'd be leaving post-election day in November. We don't know what the leadership structure will look like in the Senate. We might have some ideas or some thoughts on that. We don't know in the long term what House leadership looks like. We know, we as a Eli Lilly Company as an employer of 11,000 people, and we have a substantial workforce in the manufacturing side. And we know there are various challenges with regards to hiring folks as we ramp up our manufacturing. When we'll talk about tax reform.
Don't use all my questions
later.
before
Sorry, that's what happens. Allow me to read ahead.
We're going to draw this out a little bit.
But it will be, I think, it's sort of, a lot of it will set up how the state is getting ready for the change that's going to occur in the next 2 years. More with regards to, we know there are, I think Mike Phillips said there are 15 members of the legislature that aren't running for re-election. And inevitably there may be an upset or two. There'll be a lot of new faces, there'll be a lot of new ideas, and then there's a lot of structural changes that need to happen at the state to meet structural changes that happen at the federal level.
There are over 50 women on the ballot running for legislature. Indiana always tracks behind on the number of women in our legislature, and so that's exciting. I would say a lot of them are Democrats. There are going to be some upsets this year that people don't see coming. I think that the political playing field is way too early to predict anything as it relates to November and what it's going to look like. So it's going to be some fun times and a lot of discussions, and there are going to be a lot of prognosticators who get it wrong.
As we have all learned, whatever they say, it's probably not grounded in reality. So, but you bring up a good point. We've got some big leadership changes. Senator Brand Hirschman retired before the beginning of the session this year. Scott Pilath on the Democratic side, who was in leadership there, and now we've just had David Long, Senator Long, who has announced that he's going to be retiring here. With really big changes like that, it does create a whole new playing field for us going forward, and then throw in the people who aren't maybe running again. For people that are in making sure the space where we need to make sure that our legislators are aware of the issues that we're concerned about, when you're doing the advocacy piece of the whole thing. What does that landscape, how do you work through that landscape? How do we've got re-education, education, new programs that need to be brought out, people you need to get in to get to know. That piece of the whole thing, how does that, what does that look like for somebody like Lily or for an industry?
I think your point about education or even re-education, not in the North Korean sense of re-education, but
not in that sense, no.
But we have a sorry, we have a perspective. I think everybody in the room understands the footprint, of the life sciences industry. But new legislators who come from not within central Indiana may not have that level of understanding about the tax revenue generated by the life sciences sector, the workforce requirements of the life sciences sector. And so fundamentally, particularly from legislators who come from outside of central Indiana, we have to make sure it's not an Indianapolis issue. It is a state issue. It is a state issue where, in the device sector,
Right.
the footprint is mostly outside of central Indiana. From our perspective, we have a vendor network that is in 63 of Indiana's 92 counties. And so we rely upon a lot of our vendor network to sort of say, hey, legislator from X community, we're a big supplier to Eli Lilly and Company. We care about, they are 90% of our business. We care a lot about what they do. And so it's the education process about the size and the impact, the things that, not just from one company, but the things from the industry perspective that are important to us. And then sort of how does it parlay into decisions being made with regard to whether it's tax policy, workforce education policy. I don't know how I can tie it back to Sunday beer sales, but I'll try. but all in this sort of question about how do we create a network where in both of our sectors, innovation is the way in which we survive. And so how do we create an economic atmosphere in which innovation is sought and then rewarded?
Well, and I think that what's most important is not important in business or anything else. Relationships. And so I think we're both, and a lot of us in this room are really working hard to identify who the candidates are, what the possibilities of winning and losing are, finding out who in our sectors have relationships with whom in order to get to the table, just to begin to have the conversation about education and re-education. This is a process, and so we're going to look to you all to help us to connect dots to be able to get to these folks that are potentially going to be elected. In addition, I've talked to a number of people who say, oh, well, I don't really know them, but they've been in office for a while. Well, those thems are potentially going to be in leadership and going to be in important chairs now. So we're all trying to analyze who's going to be in what seat, who's going to be writing the budget bill. We've mentioned a number of people, but in the House leadership on the Republican side, we've also lost Bill Friend, we've lost Kathy Richardson. That makes big changes. And so we're educating, re-educating, and connecting dots, frankly. And this is going to be a process that not only goes on through the election cycle, but you're going to see a lot of scrambling next fall when we go to reorganization day in November, when committee assignments are made. There's going to be a lot of scrambling. It will be a pretty frantic time because of so many people in new chairs.
And in those new chairs, they're going to be learning a new job, and there is a ramp-up period where you kind of start again from square one. So we're going to have repeat conversations that we think we've already had, but because the audience is a new audience.
In the process. Not getting back to Sunday beer sales, but some of the other pieces of legislation that have come up and come through this year, opioids, certainly a lot of things in the public health space and that are affecting care delivery across Indiana. Particularly opioids, that is a lot of things addressing that, a lot of things that we'll be looking at addressing that going forward. That's going to be a long-term answer and solution, but it's very easy for pharma in particular to get caught up into that discussion. Are we seeing a lot of unintended consequences types of things out there, or are there particular areas that maybe could use some extra time and explanation for legislators?
Well, I think what we're seeing is a lot of At the government level, we're seeing a lot of bumping into each other with regards to jurisdiction. You've got the governor who appointed Jim McClellan, who, if you don't know, Jim McClellan is one of the finest human beings walking the face of the earth. And his background, excuse me, as the head of Goodwill of Central Indiana, it gives him sort of the understanding of both the workforce side of this, but also the human services side of this. But he's trying to align those executive branch resources in one way. You've got legislative branch resources that are trying to respond, and sometimes they're not communicating as well with each other. And then we've got a separately elected attorney general who may be taking a slightly different perspective about how we deal with drug addiction issues. And so I think the state, to be effective, is first going to have to figure out how they align their resources. The perspective, I'll say this, I don't know if any of our Lilly lawyers in the room, we're not an opioid manufacturer, nor have we ever been. But as an industry, right, they don't say all those other opioid companies, not Lilly. They say the pharmaceutical industry. So we have a responsibility to look at the problem and help address the situation in a way that really helps solve the problem. And so I think you'll see the pharmaceutical industry engage in that in a way that brings real resources at the community level, which is where this has got to be fought, and then deal with it. You're beginning to see some pushback. I have a broken ankle, in case anybody wonders why I've got a cane up here.
It's not just old.
Having come home from surgery and been given a bottle of 72 hydrocodone tablets. It was a great weekend. But it's sort of the people also asked, the professionals dealing with pain are beginning to push back also and say we have to have tools also. And so I think on that front, you'll see the pharmaceutical industry from the innovation side, the pressure on addressing that in a non-addictive manner will continue the innovation, pushing the innovation envelope. But we've also got to deal with the community needs. And part of the problem is when people are looking at narrow slices of the problem and they attempt to solve that narrow slice of the problem, they may make another part of that problem worse or not really solve the entire problem. So as an industry, what we've done is sort of say we've got to take a look at this comprehensively, find out, first identify the sources of the issues, and there are a myriad of sources of issues, but then what's the real solution? And I think as both a player in the issue and as a citizen of the community, it's our expectation that the government will first align their interests to make sure every step they take is a productive step.
Well, and I think that what we've identified is we can't deal with these issues in silos. The opioid issue, we all acknowledge, is a problem. It's not only across the board, and then it impacts our workforce issue, which then brings in a whole different set of government resources and different solutions and concerns. So I think we're in this period, and I think you've seen this in this legislative session, you'll see this in summer study committees, I think you'll see this as we look to next session, is how do we break down the silos and have real comprehensive conversations as it relates to the opioid issue and the workforce issue to try to find real solutions and use the funds that are available to us smart.
Into that space. One of the other sort of more health-related issues that has gotten some attention here lately, Alex Azar, the new head of Health and Human Services, was in town to announce some changes to the Medicaid program, the state Medicaid program. Re-upped Healthy Indiana plan for another 3 years. And made a couple of changes, including some tobacco and some work requirements. How are those going down? How are those setting well with folks or not setting well with folks, would you say? Or
does anybody else, I was stunned. Alex Azar was here. It was his first really big public event. It was a Friday. They did a presser, and it wasn't on the front page of the paper. Nobody really covered it. It was like, oh, okay, fine. Were you surprised by that?
That he was here or that it wasn't covered?
That it wasn't covered.
I had no clue that Alex was coming. I'd like to state that for the record. No, I think in Indiana, the work being done at HIP 2.0, we asked for some modifications as it was going through legislature. Some of them we got, some of them we didn't get. The work requirement, from a company perspective, we've stayed out of that as a policy area, and it's because I think there are a variety of angles on that you can consider. In part of my civic engagement, I worked with a community group on the east side, and they provide health clinics at their location on the east side of Indianapolis, and they charge their families $1 per visit. And not because it costs them $1 per visit, it actually costs much more than $1 per visit, but because they get buy-in from the family that says, I'm paying for this advice, I'm going to follow this advice. There are also, we talked about this earlier this morning, there are also real cost to work requirements that may actually cost more to enforce than it does to provide services. And so there are some balance to that. One of our concerns on the HIP 2.0 as a player in the healthcare field is the way in which people get kicked off of HIP 2.0 and how long it takes to get them back on HIP 2.0 for services. And so we continue to work with that. I think the answer to your question is things are moving.
This is a really big deal for Indiana.
Things are moving so fast and furious, though, that there's other games in town, or not necessarily in town, other towns and other games. But I can tell you from the Lilly perspective, we're confident. Alex knows the system. We will allow Alex to do his job without a whole lot of influence from us. And I think he understands the system. And so when we deal with whether it's price transparency issues or other issues that are, again, looking at narrow sliver and tipping to solve a problem in a very narrow way, we know Alex understands the system. Again, we have a role to play in finding those solutions as an industry and as a company, and we'll play that appropriate role.
Absolutely. Well, we've danced around it a couple times. Let's hop into workforce. That seems to be where this is all headed anyway. And Mike, as you've alluded here, for a company the size of Lilly, the strategy, all of your strategies to be effective have to align. Whether that's federal strategies, aligning with workforce strategies, aligning with tax policy, aligning with just the environmental factors, the ability to do business within a state or a location, and the way all of that impacts everything. Really, one of the core pieces of that, though, is the workforce piece of it. Can you talk a little bit about where those strategies align and how that impacts something?
I'll give you an example. So where's Roger Harvey? Roger, was it March of this year or last year we announced the Trulicity manufacturing expansion? I had a lot of opioids over the course of a couple of weeks, and I can't remember anything anymore. And we have a relatively new product on the market, Trulicity. We can't make it fast enough. And so literally, and it comes in a vial, we are manually manufacturing that in some places right now. So we announced a $80 million manufacturing expansion in the Indianapolis facility out at the Lilly Tech Center. So you talked about sort of how all these, it obviously involves supply chain, it involves where we're going to sell this, it involves, most importantly, human capital, human talent. 1 in every 3 people we attempt to hire in our manufacturing facilities fails a drug test. And it isn't just opioids. We're dealing with the fact that people come and take a drug test, and when they are told they test positive for marijuana, they say, marijuana is illegal? And that may be more of that than it is opioids. But so it's the alignment. I go back, Kristen mentioned that I'm on the Indianapolis Public School Board. One of the things fundamentally our human resource people struggle with is we've got and this is a statewide issue in Indiana. I believe it's probably a nationwide issue. There is within educational systems, within communities all across the board, we still deal with the mentality that says, by and large in Indiana, and I can only speak of Indiana because that's where I'm from, that's where I live, my family's from southern Indiana. The old model was you could graduate from high school, you could find a job at the manufacturing facility, you'd get married, you'd have kids, you'd have that job for 40 years, and then you'd retire. And so by and large, our system of education is built around that old model. And we've been talking about changing that model. I'm 54 years old, for at least 20 years, or maybe 25 years of changing that model. But the cultural aspects of where we see it in our communities is by and large, that's the model, and it's no longer true, right? Those type of jobs in the manufacturing community or in the manufacturing side of things require advanced degrees. Our greatest success, Hodge, I think, was on a tour with Senator Donnelly when one of our human resources people said our greatest success in recruiting people are retired military or former military. One, they're going to pass a drug test. Two, they are trained in process. And these are process, technology-driven jobs. But when at IPS, when we moved to our career academies and aligned that with our state's education programs, we're one of the few school systems that stood up at the State Board of Education and spoke on behalf of that. Because the mentality of apparently some communities is we're telling people they're going to achieve less because they're going into a career training academy at the high school level. At the same time that going to college is becoming, I got one that is in college, one that's getting ready to go to college. Going to college is becoming increasingly difficult. And so we have to align our educational standards to our manufacturing, our company needs. And we heard the director of the Indiana Manufacturing Association raise it as a population question. It isn't just a population question. I think that's a part of it. But what we're seeing at the legislative level is it is a lagging indicator. Right? They are slow to adjust to this, and I think a lot of it is that cultural pushback of sort of how do we align our educational standards with our employee, our state economic needs.
Well, and that's one of the great things about being new. I've spent most of the last 100 days going out to each of our member companies and learning more about what they need, about their communities, and learned about the My Cook Pathways program. They understand immediately that there are potential employees who need to finish their high school degree. They have figured out how to put together a program that these people, these employees, work in the morning, go to school in the afternoon for 7 weeks, get their GED. They understand the need for childcare. We also have a problem with affordable housing. We have transportation needs. We have a wage gap problem. But they quit waiting for the government to come in and fix it. A lot of our companies and a lot of the companies that y'all represent are frankly just saying, okay, this is what we need to do. Let's go figure out how to accomplish it. And that goes to higher education. It used to be we did tuition reimbursement programs. A lot of companies now are actually flipping that. They're paying directly to the educational universities, schools, etc., for these degrees, as opposed, they understand that maybe the employees don't have the cash up front to pay for it, so they're making it happen, anticipating and filling the gaps as we go along to grow a homegrown workforce.
And I use an example to point out sort of identifying a problem, solving the problem, and then getting penalized for solving the problem. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Excel centers. But the Excel centers identify 19 to 24, 25-year-olds who did not get their high school diploma. I think there are now 15 Excel centers across the state. And they're not only getting their high school diplomas, not just GEDs, their high school diplomas, but they're getting advanced certifications in high-demand fields. And I referenced Jim McClellan. Jim was the CEO of Goodwill at the time. They identified a state funding source that sort of said, we're going to treat, on a per-pupil basis, these folks who still have to get their high school diplomas as per-pupil funding students. And the message back from the legislature, I think 2 years in, was, whoa, you're getting way too many kids their diplomas and certifications. It's costing us too much money. We're solving a problem. And we're getting them not just high school diplomas, but back into the workforce. And the message from the legislature was, you're doing that too well and it's costing us too much money. That's what I'm referencing by saying the legislature's got to sort of address their framework about sort of, if we have people without high school degrees and we're figuring out ways to get them their high school degrees and certifications, right. The interesting thing is, I think the highest demand field, at least a year ago, was welding, right? Was welding certifications. There's a backlog of about 2,500 jobs last time I checked, I don't know if anybody, I saw somebody from the IEDC here, but we can get somebody from essentially working at a 7-Eleven into a job where they're making about $45,000-$50,000 a year in the course of about an 18-month period. But you're doing that so well, we have to limit your funding to do that.
Well, and I think that the legislature is looking at problems like that and other problems and trying to figure out solutions. I had the opportunity to be with Representative Bading, who is the head of the House Education Committee, on Friday at a job training facility. And one of the things that he kept pressing is, okay, we've been dealing with high school, but what we really need to do is start talking to children in junior high, because they're starting to make their decisions, start looking at their high school, and by the time, what we've learned by talking to high school students is that high school students would have planned better when they were freshmen and sophomore had we talked to them earlier. So now we just keep getting younger and younger with regard to developing workforce. We also have an issue with our parents. Our parents haven't gotten over the idea that it's not your father's factory or your grandfather's factory anymore. And some of our facilities are amazing, bright, technologically very accelerated facilities, and we have to get the parents into them so that they understand what these educational opportunities are for their children, and how that they'll develop. So there's a lot. We're back to education, re-education, about the possibilities, not just opportunities, but possibilities.
It's an ongoing
Yes.
process, no matter where you start in that.
And it's a reality in the industries we represent that the people who are on the manufacturing side are going to have to do what lawyers and doctors and others, continuing education all the time, right? Technology changes dramatically every 2 to 3 years.
Well, and I think that's a key point. One of the things that I've stumbled into, because I'm old and a lot of my peers is tech, 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 tech. And people immediately think data. They think Infosys, Salesforce. Well, Mike and I will tell you, and you know, Kristen, a lot of the jobs in our industry are tech jobs. They're not maybe data-driven jobs, but they are tech jobs. And we've got to get into that discussion as we continue to talk workforce and as we talk about tech and entrepreneurship, because so many of our supply side jobs are coming from our entrepreneurs.
Absolutely, and particularly also in Indiana, the digital side of things. That piece of it is, we've already demonstrated excellence in that here in the state. That extends into the life sciences space, that extends into the analysis space, that extends into the healthcare space. So much of that is going to be impacting everybody's jobs going forward, that piece is equally.
But this is also, we're doing a lot of talking by each other. If you say the word tech, the word digital, what you may have a different impression, you may have a different impression, I may have a different impression of what that means. And now it's cool to talk about tech and digital. But I've found myself stopping people and going, exactly what do you mean by that? What's your preference? So that we start from the same point so that we can have a conversation where we have an opportunity to really work together as opposed to talking by each other.
Understanding where that all starts. One thing I would point out, sorry, I don't mean to ignore the folks down at that end of the room. You all have note cards in front of you. If you have questions, please let us know. Write them out. We'll have somebody come around. Deb in the back of the room there will be happy to come around and pick those up. Just hold them up, and we'll work those into the conversation wherever we can here. We've covered a lot of state issues. It has not been unquiet on the federal front as well. And as we all know, a lot of that has trickle-down effects. One of the big ones here just lately has been tax reform, which came and was voted on in a blink and happened, and now we're trying to sort of figure out where that may impact us going forward. It's something that industry has long called for, in modifications that have allowed people to maybe look at new ways of reallocating funding and things to do with that. Any impressions on how that may affect operations here in Indiana? Thank you. Oh my gosh.
Lilly, as a company, not pharma as an industry, advocated for tax reform. The industry obviously is made up of domestic and international players, so we worked very hard on tax reform. Our estimation, I talked about the manufacturing investment we made in the spring of 2017 was an $80 million investment. The estimation from everybody knows, if you don't know David Lewis, one of our chief tax guys, I think everybody that works in government around Indianapolis does, we believe we'll have an increase of about, just due to the change of the rate, we'll have about $250 million more a year to make in infrastructure investments. And that means streamlining manufacturing, that means investments in our facilities, adding capacity where capacity needs to be added, making those manufacturing changes necessary to be more efficient. We are expecting, again, this is one of those things I think will happen next year. The state always aligns their tax policies with the federal tax policies. So we'll see that, I think, begin to get implemented in the states, again, more in 2019 legislative sessions across the country. What that means by way of state taxation policy, I don't know. I mean, I know that's one of the big challenges our fiscal leaders in Indiana face is sort of how do we tax the changing economy, right? We have a tax structure built on the old economy. How do we tax the new economy? And somebody's ox is going to get gored on that. I hope it's not ours, but sort of how do we align those things? And we'll continue to work with the fiscal leadership again to make sure that it allows us to be competitive. But we as an industry, we as a company, supported tax reform. Now it was interesting. We did an employee activation, and I would not call it unanimous among our employees.
Really?
Yeah.
Elaborate.
It wasn't unanimous among our employees.
Mike and I, as many of you probably know, have different political backgrounds, so that was just us playing games with each other. That being said, I think that what we see that Lilly has done as it relates to infrastructure and reinvestment in our businesses is happening across the board. And that's exciting and provides all kinds of opportunities, new jobs, growth, and where from the medical device industry point of view, we were happy with obviously the 2-year extension of the medical device
That was
tax.
where we were headed next.
Repeal, but we need permanent repeal. 2 years is great, but it's really hard to plan a business cycle and to all of our folks were prepared, to be paying taxes the end of January. They had already planned for 2018, and they had already allotted that money to pay in taxes. So we've got to go back to work to make sure that we get a permanent repeal at the federal level as it relates to our tax.
For a lot of things.
And that's one of the things I think to point out, whether it's the medical device tax, we have to annually we used to at least have to annually re-up the R&D tax. One of the things everybody, you learn this in economics classes, businesses hate uncertainty, and sort of as we're not asked to plan on bienniums. We're asked to make 1 year, 5 year, and 10-year plans, and so the expectation among taxpayers is sort of say, here's what we think the future looks like, pending decisions you all make as legislators. I think creates difficulty.
And I just want to add, Hodge is here. Our congressional delegation, the senators, our House members, our governor weighed in twice with 2 letters to congressional leadership. They get how important the medical device industry is to our state, and they worked side by side really hard with us to make sure that this got put into the tax bill. There were conversations going on up until we saw the final bill that this wasn't going to happen. And I just want to give a lot of credit to our congressional delegation for working hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the federal level, it was one of those issues where for states like Indiana and Minnesota and California and some others that have a huge vesting in the medical device industry get it, and they are huge advocates. And the real work is in trying to help folks who maybe aren't quite as engaged in it, help them understand the impacts from that. And our folks have been tremendous advocates across the board, with a big shout out to them. A couple other points there, but I want to get to some of the audience questions in this one. one person asked, is there state legislation being proposed to assist with driving down individual health care costs in Indiana?
There is. We were discussing this morning. There is a piece of legislation being offered by a literally newly selected by caucus state senator that sends a question, healthcare costs, to an interim study committee. What that means, I mean, it's as we all know, and I talked about this earlier. We as a player in the field have an obligation to be part of the conversation, part of the solution. When you look at the whole picture, it can't just be one segment of the industry, and there are a variety of components. It's why companies, big companies in particular, have really focused on wellness. We just can't offer solely health insurance. We have to offer wellness programs, which helps us dial down our cost of health insurance. But it's sort of this, the perspective of I just take a pill and I get better, it isn't reality. And so I think the need to look at the system as a system is the real requirement of something like that. But there is that bill. I don't know what the likelihood of it. The way it works in Indiana. They can pass legislation that calls for an interim study committee. It goes to legislative council. Legislative council has 500 requests for interim study committees, and they can only fill 10% of those.
Right. Who knows what it's going to look like this summer? But
and the reality of it is,
it's possible.
And the reality of it is, you can't solve that problem as an individual state. This is a national issue.
Right.
And there will be presumably things coming down that pipeline
yes.
as well. that must be integrated into the picture. And as you said, as the tiers start to influence each other, and when those are in alignment, then maybe you'll finally start to see a little bit of action.
Well, and unfortunately, it is an election year, and you've got about probably 30 to 60, maybe 90 more days before everything just pretty much comes to a stop except formality, and we go to campaign mode.
And it all switches from there. We have two questions related back to the opioid issue, and this may be a little bit out of everybody's depth, but I think one of them in particular. Are there examples of communities that are coming together to address the opioid workforce issue in particular? Are we seeing anything across the state where there are local solutions that are being piloted or tried, or is there any sort of larger coordinating effort around that that you're aware of?
I think we watch the work that the state's drug czar is doing and attempting to engage. I think they understand they've got to engage at the community level. I think there are any number of issues that are attempting to engage at that level. I'm not aware of one that is sort of the model of success. And when it is, it's there may be a small community program that's having success in a small place like that, but attempting to bring that model to scale, is not.
Well, and I think you've got Jim McClellan, you've got Jennifer Walthall, you've got Dr. Chris Fox, who's the health commissioner, the new head of FSSA. I think that you have fairly new people in these jobs trying to work with communities, identify what's working and not working, trying to actually put together a model program and figuring out what federal and state resources we have to bring to bear to really deal with this at the most local level.
It seems like it's one of those issues that has been in the public eye and in the public consciousness now for a couple of years. But really, as far as taking legislative action goes, we're still very much in the early stages of how do you get your arms around the problem and find that path forward. We started in crisis response mode and did a lot of things in that space, but building what the future looks like for those kinds of programs is still something that is going to take a lot of discussion. And we're going to see the summer study committees, and we're going to see this as part of the larger national conversation as well.
But even the sort of guidances and decisions that have been made, I flippantly said I came home with 72. I did come home with 72. And it was because I was having surgery on a Friday, and they said, "Here, we really would rather not hear from you on Saturday afternoon that you need more." My oldest daughter had wisdom teeth taken out. She came home with a similar amount, So we've got prescribing practices that even though they aren't consistent with what's the inspect program guidance and others, that they still continue. So there are lots of things that can be done. We then also have to make sure they're being followed.
And implement, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm not exactly sure what this one, this just says opioids for VA. I don't know that there's anything in particular legislatively.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, sorry. We'll come back to that if anything comes into that.
I do know that I was with Senator Donnelly a few weeks ago, and we're losing, is it 20,000 people a year to overdoses?
67,000 across the country.
I mean, it's
1,800 in Indiana.
if you want to think about the human cost of that.
Absolutely.
Kind of mind-boggling.
Absolutely. Sorry. Reading as I go and trying to figure out how we work this one in. Back to the tech conversation, perhaps. And I don't know that this is anything anybody here would have necessarily any additional insight into. As far as we know, they're asking about the Amazon headquarters. My take on that one is it shows Indiana is a great location. We are being recognized for a lot of our technology and tech and software development talent in particular. Until Amazon comes forward and announces sort of their next steps in that process, we're on the list of 20, and I think we should be really, really, really proud of that. And I know a lot of people who've worked really hard to get us there. So
I think that's right. I think being on the list of 20 is a huge, big deal for our state and for our community. In addition to that, I believe that whether we get Amazon or not, I was lucky enough to go on the Indy Chamber trip to Seattle last year, at which point they said, whether you get Amazon Q2 or not, what you're doing is positioning yourself and your community for something. And so I think we're right on the cusp of some real exciting things happening here.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. The Amazon HQ2 deal it'll be a big deal when it's awarded, and somebody's going to tabulate the cost of getting that deal. And in many times, having been involved in other economic development deals, the deal that comes after the Amazon HQ2, because you're on the list of, wow, we didn't know Indianapolis had that type of tech workforce, all this sort of thing, it ends up costing you a lot less per job and may have the same or close to financial impact. The other thing that it has, I think, done, and I've, other than read about it, it also has caused, I think, led by the Chamber and the Mayor's office and the Governor's office and others, to really require the Central Indiana community to better align, better account for its assets when it looks at economic development projects. And so when I was in the Mayor's office, getting somebody to sit down at the table with you from Hamilton County while we were sitting in Marion County to say, how do we cooperate on something like this, that was very difficult to do. This has been an example of everybody all along that food chain cooperating very well.
Well, and Mike and I both have the opportunity to travel out of state often. And what I'm hearing from people across the country is they're watching what we're doing. Absolutely. They're paying attention. There are a lot of people who are wondering how we're doing it. They really admire the communication which you're talking about. In addition to the possibility of Amazon or something else, there's 3 sports championships, which has been our bread and butter as it relates to being a sports community for a long time. There are a lot of exciting things happening in the Indianapolis area, in the 9-county area, in Indiana. And I think we all get so involved in the details and the TikTok that we don't often take a second to step back and go, whoa, we're really making some cool stuff happening. My family is in Illinois, and I got to tell you, they're envious of what we're doing in Indiana.
That's all good. Yeah, I was going to say I've been out in the coast a couple times, and the conversations just with folks in the industry. We're being recognized for more than just Lilly, no offense. And particularly if you get somebody whose experience with Indiana maybe has been Lilly, they're saying, oh yeah, that either wasn't there or wasn't in place when I lived in Indiana, or it's great to see what's happening. I've been reading in the news. I've been following it along. So it really, in people's consciousness, which is where, a state that struggles with our identity sometimes, where we really want to be, and it's infiltrating and it's getting there. So I think regardless of whether Amazon actually shows up here, hopefully they don't take my parking space. That's what I'm mostly concerned about. But if they do show up here, that will be fabulous. And even if they don't, they've brought good stuff to Indiana, so we're happy about that. So, one more question on the workforce side here, and we've got just a couple more questions. I'll get back to sort of some wrap-up stuff here. Mike, you've said frequently that as Lilly's growth plans for Indiana is going to be a lot through your vendor network and your suppliers and the work that is done to help support the industry. Given that there's just been a large round of folks who have been turned loose into the workforce here, how do you think sort of that transition is going to be helping? We're going to see a lot of folks, hopefully, who remain in the community and who stay here and pick up some of that capacity.
So on technically December 31st, but I think it was actually December 22nd, about a little over 2,300 people walked out the door at Lilly with a nice fat retirement package and a bonus for months served. Our data from the last time we did a program like that was in the, I believe it was the 1993 timeframe, and roughly half of those people stayed in central Indiana, and another half of that half created their own small companies, some of which became vendors to Lilly, some of which became different non-aligned industries. Our perspective is as a company, one of the things, if you all remember Lilly going through what we called years YZ, when we had a big patent cliff fall off and we had to make up revenues and we put a lot of different business decisions together to make up that gap. The leadership at the company has said essentially we want to avoid those types of patent cliffs and big growth periods followed by slashes of jobs. And so I identify we're at about 11,000, maybe about 10,000 now in central Indiana. We're at about 37,000 globally. Our anticipation is as we grow business lines and as we step out of other business lines, we anticipate Lilly's size to be about the same. We believe we're going to grow our business prospects by aligning partner companies, startups, small companies, bringing them to the Indiana life sciences sector. A lot of the work we develop requires device industries to co-develop that with us. The Alzheimer's diagnosis tool being one of them that didn't work, but it required a partner device company to develop it with us. We're working on a non-opioidal painkiller. I can't say non-addictive yet because I've been advised I can't say non-addictive. We don't know that yet, but that's sort of the goal of that. We're working with Pfizer and co-developing that. That's probably a couple of years down the road. That is likely going to take off, but we'll align ourselves both with Pfizer and others to sort of say, okay, how do we, as it used to be our drugs that were branded drugs would time off at about, Andy, I'm looking at you thinking 8 or 9 years, and we're seeing that cycle be more 5 to 6 years. So even our lifespan of our medicines is shortened, so those cycles have shortened. And so we view developing this ecosphere of life sciences companies and potential partners and real partners and others here to help us sort of fire back and forth with each other with innovation. I don't know if that answers your question.
That's cool stuff, too.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys have changed to realign and thinking long term. I mean, there's big, cool stuff happening which provides new opportunities.
Well, it's why we're such heavy partners in the Indiana Biosciences Research Institute, why we're such heavy partners with BioCrossroads. We have to develop independent companies within our sphere of influence and our geography here, or we can't innovate quickly enough.
And I tell you, one of the most fascinating things about my role and yours as well is really the opportunity to see where all of these things come together and how where the cutting edge is moving and how fast it's moving, and where the merger between all of these industries is really coming like this right now.
But interestingly enough, this isn't necessarily really new. If you think back, if you went to the Indiana State Historical Society and you saw the Jonas Salk exhibit, and so Dr. Salk in his laboratory found the cure for polio, but they didn't have a mechanism to manufacture it at scale. Eli Lilly and Company manufactured the polio vaccine at scale. That's kind of what we see. We have a partner here who has an idea, a treatment method, a new technology, a new biologic or a new chemical drug. We have the capacity to partner with them, and then when it's time to manufacture that's sort of where our take it to market capacity.
Well, and that brings IDRI and some of the potential work that's being done there that we hope to get done there and the growth. I mean, there are all kinds of potential partnerships and opportunities that we didn't even think about a year ago, 2 years ago, that may be here sooner than we think as it relates to the whole 16-step corridor.
Right.
And I tend to be a cheerleader and a homer. That being said, it's happening here in Indiana, and we're leading, we're on cutting edge, and I think that's a great place to be.
A lot of faith. We'll give each of you, we're running short on time here, give me your thoughts on what we're going to see for the remainder of this year topic-wise that people should be paying attention to, whether it's things that might come up in summer study, whether it's things that on the national or local front that will be making the life science and healthcare headlines, or...
I'll let you answer for the national front.
I think it's
What's he going to tweet today?
I think it's going to be an interesting year. I don't think that the topics are going to change much from workforce, from obviously we're going to continue to see, I think, results of the tax package as it relates to what it does to stimulate our economy. But politics is really going to be the conversation of the day. And while that's happening, I'm going to continue going out and visiting all my companies, finding out what they need, and how to make sure that IMDMC remains a vital source in the conversation.
Well, I don't think healthcare and the sort of myriad of issues that it encompasses, whether it is opioid addiction, whether it is price of healthcare, whether it is, how do we engage in the economy, all those sort of things. None of that's going away, and it's sort of how do we find a way to utilize the resources we have to positively affect those discussions.
Just build the path forward and figure it out as we go.
I think we're looking to January.
Yeah.
We'll have a new Congress and a new legislature, and we'll be back to work.
And we'll do this again next year. Hopefully we'll have you both back.
Perfect.
Thank you all so much. Thank you all for joining us today. I apologize, there are a couple questions there we didn't quite get to, and a whole lot of other stuff we were going to cover that we didn't quite get to. But please join us again next month, third Tuesday. We'll announce the topic here shortly. And welcome to 2018, and welcome back. Have a great day. Thank you.